The kiss hits the fan. Is it possible to circle a date on the calendar, a specific day or time when you realize everything has changed? I'm not sure. In the year following the release of Alive, my life was turned inside out, to the point where I barely recognized myself or the life I was living. It happened gradually, and then all at once. I don't know how else to explain it. You wake up one morning and find that you've traded a bedroom in your parents' house for an apartment in Manhattan or a mansion in the Connecticut woods. You're no longer taking cabs or relying on your girlfriend for transportation. Instead, you're driving a Porsche, and 3 other cars are sitting in the driveway. No more Ramadas or Holiday Inns. 5-star hotels all the way. No more Denny's, not that there's anything wrong with Denny's, by the way. No more IHOP. But the biggest change, for me the most glaring reminder that Kiss was no longer just 4 guys from New York with big dreams and weird ideas about how to make them come true, was when we actually went out to play at night. Not only were we headlining almost every show, but we were playing some of the biggest arenas in the country, and soon we were touring in Europe and Asia. More often than not, the venue was sold out. The money is nice, of course, especially when you haven't had a lot before. The money buys freedom, if not necessarily happiness, and it is a barometer of success. But if you're a serious musician, there's nothing like playing in a packed arena, in front of 20,000 screaming fans. That was my fantasy when I was a kid, and suddenly it wasn't a fantasy anymore. In the mid to late 1970s, Kiss was as hot a ticket as there was in rock and roll. I remember playing 3 nights at Madison Square Garden, with my family in the audience, and thinking, how the fuck did this happen? Here I am, the black sheep of the family, and by the time I'm in my mid-20s, I'm the golden kid. I can do no wrong. It really warmed my heart to see the reaction of my parents and in-laws and other family members when they would come to a Kiss concert in New York. I'd call them up, give them the full treatment, limo ride, backstage VIP passes, meet and greet with celebrities. The whole 9 yards. And it was wonderful to be able to do that for them. To be honest, though, I'm not sure how much everyone really understood the whole rock scene. The only thing they knew was that I was famous and there was a lot of money being made, which must have meant that I was successful. Everyone seemed proud of that, but it probably baffled them a bit. I mean, shit, it baffled me, too. How do you prepare for something like that? You don't. You can't. 18 months earlier I'd been happily pocketing $70 a week from Bill Aucoin. And making it last. Now we were breaking attendance records everywhere we went. We'd gone from freak show to household name seemingly overnight. All hell broke loose. Everywhere we went, it was Kiss mania. We'd built a fan base prior to Alive. But now everything was amplified tenfold. In Cadillac, Michigan, the entire town celebrated its love affair with the band, hosting what amounted to a week-long Kiss festival. Bill Aucoin thought it would be great publicity to play along with the town, so we flew into Cadillac on October 9, 1975, and took part in the Cadillac High School homecoming parade. We even played a live show, a tamer, more family-friendly version of our usual performance. We turned it into a big media event. I had a lot of fun doing that because it was kind of tongue-in-cheek and irreverent. We put makeup on the mayor and some of the other local officials. Everyone got into the spirit of things. I thought it was a terrific event, because it represented thinking outside the box. It deviated from the norm, which I always enjoyed. I like the unexpected. I don't like to know what I'm going to be doing a year from now, or 5 years from now. I like spontaneity, that's what keeps my creative juices flowing. That said, I can't stress strongly enough how little involvement I had in the promotion, marketing, and merchandising of the Kiss brand. I just went along for the ride. A lot of the time it was fun, of course. It's fun until, well, until it's not fun anymore. I felt invincible for the longest time. I think we all did. There was a rhythm to each show, and it began in the dressing room, while we were putting on our makeup. Like four chicks in a beauty parlor, we'd sit in front of the mirrors and dab at our faces and gossip, never really looking at each other but carrying on an endless four-way discussion. The dressing room was completely off limits to anyone but our innermost circle. Not even wives or girlfriends were permitted in the dressing room. Just band members, our road manager, and the wardrobe girls who helped us with our costumes. Later on, we hired a hairdresser to apply wigs to those band members who needed a little help. We'd sit in our chairs, in full costumes, being transformed into our various characters, and we'd chat about what had happened during the day, or the previous night, or whatever little changes we had planned for the show. If someone had screwed up the previous night, or in sound check, this was the place where we'd talk about it. Sometimes the conversation could be blunt: watch the tempo. Don't fuck up again. Ace, don't forget the fucking solo. More often, though, the mood was light. Gene often showed us Polaroid snapshots of the girls he'd been with the night before, and that brought out mixed reactions from all of us. Sometimes to the point of hysterical laughter. We'd pump ourselves up, talk about putting on a great show, and joke about how much fun we were going to have afterward. Even then, for me, the party had already begun. I started drinking before the show and kept at it while we played. Afterward, we'd usually jump in a limo and head back to the hotel, where we'd shower and change and become acquainted with the more attractive members of the burgeoning Kiss Army. If we needed to be somewhere right after the show, we'd use the shower facilities at the arena. Usually, anyway. Once in a while there would be a party at the venue, which allowed us to fulfill the wishes of fans who were more interested in having sex with the characters in Kiss than in having sex with the men behind the makeup. Please, I want to fuck the spaceman. I sometimes accommodated. Different strokes, right? More often, though, we retreated to the hotel and the privacy of a hospitality suite, where an assortment of beautiful gals would be waiting. We used to call it the chicken coop, for obvious reasons. To any normal person living a regular life, this probably sounds completely bizarre. But it was normal for us. The hedonistic, aberrant behavior becomes a way of life when you're at the top of the rock and roll ladder. If you want to have sex 5 times a day, with 5 different women, all you have to do is open the door. That wasn't normally my cup of tea, but Gene loved every minute. It becomes a game, a way to pass the time, or, in Gene's case, maybe an addiction. You take advantage of it for any number of reasons, the most obvious being boredom and availability. Same thing with drugs. I have an addictive personality. I'm an alcoholic. I don't want to minimize the damage that drinking can do, but for the longest time that's all I was, a drinker. When the money began pouring in, that all changed. There was a time when cocaine absolutely scared the shit out of me. Not in the way that it scares me now, which is basically the way any drug, including alcohol, scares me a good, healthy if I start using again I will die kind of fear. I'm talking about a gut-level fear. The kind you have when you're a little kid, a fear of the unknown. Even though I started drinking at a young age and experimented with sniffing glue and became a casual user of marijuana, all by the time I got into high school, there was something about cocaine or any hard drug that scared me. As a kid I considered cocaine and heroin to be on the same level, and to be capable of approximately the same degree of devastation. I didn't want to touch hard drugs, and in those days cocaine fell into that category. It wasn't a chic drug, it wasn't cool or hip. In my eyes, it was no different than heroin, which was the dangerous drug, the loser's drug. I never did get into heroin. In fact, aside from the 1 or 2 times When I suspect someone laced my coke with it, I never even tried heroin. But cocaine? Oh yeah. Big time. Our next album, Destroyer, represented a departure for Kiss, and not merely because of the cocaine and Courvoisier on the mixing console. The producer on Destroyer was Bob Ezrin, a studio wizard best known for his work with Alice Cooper, and a guy so widely acknowledged as being a production genius that everyone was basically willing to look the other way when it became apparent that he had a few vices of his own. That was one of the things that bothered me most about Paul and Gene. They were very selective in their moral indignation. Bob was a brilliant producer, so they gave him a free pass, much the same way they did with Neil Bogart during the production of Dress to Kill. I think the word hypocritical might be apropos at this point. I remember the very first time I tried coke. It was during the recording of the Destroyer album, in December 1975. Watching Bob and others partake of the glittery crystalline powder during the recording and mixing process intrigued me and brought out my curiosity. I figured that if a genius like Bob did it, and he was very successful at what he did, then maybe it was the missing link I had been looking for in my life. I asked Peter if he could hook me up with some since I knew he had a connection. He scored some coke for me and it changed my life from that day forward. The first time I ripped a few lines of blow I felt like I'd discovered something almost as good as sex. My whole body came to life. It was a terrific buzz on its own, and in the beginning it gave me focus and clarity, but you know what I liked the most about coke? It made me a better drinker. I was already damned prodigious, but cocaine put me in a different league. It allowed me to drink longer and harder without passing out. I could party way into the wee hours, into the next morning and afternoon, maybe right on into the next night if I felt like it. If I had my blow I could keep on going like the Energizer Bunny. Hour after depraved hour. What I discovered, what any connoisseur of cocaine discovers, is the remarkable ability of the human body to withstand abuse. Cocaine is a stimulant, alcohol a depressant. Used smartly, notice I didn't say intelligently, the two chemicals balance each other out. It's almost like a speedball, the alcohol, or, in the case of a speedball, the heroin, depressing the central nervous system and the cocaine jolting it back to life. Of course, I'd never done a speedball, never would have considered it. Mix heroin and cocaine? No fucking way. Too dangerous. People I knew had died from that concoction. You'd have to be out of your mind. But cocaine and alcohol? Oh yeah. All night long, baby. Once I started doing cocaine, there was no stopping me. It really was that clear a line of demarcation, and it began with Destroyer. For a while it didn't even have an adverse impact on my playing. Cocaine can actually make you sharper. For me, in smaller doses, it was like guzzling coffee. I had tried speed a few times and didn't like it, made me too jumpy. But coke worked beautifully, especially in combination with alcohol. I'd get comfortably numb, as they say. Coke went hand in hand with sex, too, which was another terrific selling point. You could have more sex on cocaine. You could have better sex on cocaine. In the beginning, at least, I thought it was a wonder drug, the perfect enhancement for the rock star life. As with every drug, though, you can build up a tolerance to cocaine, and after a while it doesn't work quite as well. You have to do more blow to get the desired effect. You're always chasing the memory of that first buzz from the first line, but you never seem to get it again. Then you need more alcohol to come down. Pretty soon the highs aren't as high and the lows are crushingly painful. There's a cycle to it. You end up taking tranquilizers or sleeping pills to fall asleep. I always called it a triad. If you're going to do alcohol and coke in large quantities, you have to have downers at your disposal, because the alcohol ain't enough. If you're going to stay up for 2 or 3 days doing coke, which I did on several occasions, you need tranquilizers or sleeping pills. Then, after a while, you start taking pain pills to manage the crushing morning, after pain hangovers like nothing you can imagine. It's crazy stuff. My hangovers were terrible, like the worst migraine in the world. I'd wake up and vomit so hard I'd see stars. I was doing champagne for a while, and those were terrible hangovers. A champagne, cocaine hangover is unbelievable. Any drug, alcohol hangover is worse than an alcohol hangover by itself. Your whole body aches, because the cocaine intensifies the headache and makes you feel more edgy once it wears off. Your nerves are frazzled. So what do? Quit drinking? Lay off the blow? Course not. You start taking painkillers and tranquilizers. Every morning begins with Percocet and every night ends with Valium. Then night blurs into day, and pretty soon you're taking both of them by the fistful, and slowly you begin to lose your edge, as well as your mind. One day you wake up and realize you've crossed a line, and you say to yourself, man, I am strung out. And not only am I strung out, I don't even know me anymore. That's pretty scary. It happens more quickly for some people than for others. The disease progresses differently in each person. For some people it takes only a year or two to become a full-blown addict. For others it takes much longer. I was leading a life totally detached from reality. I went from having little money or worldly possessions to having staggering wealth and fame. And I hadn't the vaguest fucking clue as to how to handle any of it. Like I said, I'd had a couple of bad experiences with drugs in high school, so for the longest time I was content to stick with what worked for me, which was mainly booze. Cocaine was extremely expensive in 1975. We're not talking about cheap cocaine, we're not talking about crack. You didn't get into cocaine unless you had the resources to do it right. After Alive, I had the resources, and pretty soon I had the contacts, which led me down the rabbit hole in fairly short order. For example, one of my coke dealers was this guy named Jeff who supposedly had been a mercenary in South America. I don't know whether that was in fact true, but the guy certainly had an intense and dangerous vibe about him. He also had some of the best blow in the city. I'd gotten to know Jeff through Peter, and before long he became my primary source of cocaine. Whatever else the guy might have been, he was no slouch in the drug trade. His shit was uniquely pure and powerful. Not cheap, either. As a result, Jeff had a very elite clientele, with lots of celebrities, as well as the usual assortment of doctors, lawyers, and Wall Street types. I remember stopping by his place on 8th Street one day and passing one of the Stones on the way out. Not that it was a big deal that they used blow. In the late 70s, it was hard to find anyone with money or fame who didn't do coke. People did blow the way people today drink beer. It seemed almost normal. I used to hear stories about Jeff and how his clientele was expanding beyond the point where he could safely or reasonably accommodate everyone. He was selling shit uncut, the story went, and to get uncut blow from South America was considered a real score. Word got out and the traffic in and out of Jeff's apartment building became uncomfortably busy. It was the weirdest thing. He was clearly running a business, but he didn't treat it that way, probably because he was too busy getting fucked up himself. Sometimes he'd deliver, and other times I had to call him up, set up an appointment, and go down to his place in the East Village. Most of the time I'd exchange cash for blow, and instead of just running out of there, I'd hang out and do a few lines with Jeff and whoever else was hanging around. He wasn't exactly a friend of mine. Like a lot of people I got to know in those days, he was just a guy I did drugs with. One day I missed an appointment to cop some blow. I forget why or what happened. It really doesn't matter. The point of the story is that on the day I was supposed to meet Jeff, he and his girlfriend were killed. Shot in the head execution, style, the cops said, right in their own apartment. I remember seeing the story on the news and feeling a mixture of sadness and relief. It shouldn't have come as a surprise that Jeff was killed. If his background story was accurate, it's easy to envision a scenario in which he had managed to offend his distributors in South America, or had maybe edged into territory previously controlled by the mob in New York. He was playing with fire. And as one of his best clients, and one of his party partners, so was I. If something hadn't come up, I could have been there the day Jeff was killed. I guess a guardian angel was looking over my shoulder on that day. It wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. When we set out to make Destroyer, Bob Ezrin had been brought in specifically because he understood the challenges associated with taking a big, live theatrical act and translating its sound to the studio. So far, Kiss hadn't done that. We were a popular live band that reached a tipping point on the strength of a live album. The next logical step was to capitalize on that newfound popularity by recording a terrific studio album, which meant making some changes in the way things had been done. Around the time we hooked up with Bob, he was among the hottest producers in the business, having worked with Dr. John, Alice Cooper, and Lou Reed. Going strictly by his reputation and resume, I was looking forward to working with Bob, and while I think Destroyer is an interesting and even innovative Kiss record, the recording process isn't something I recall with great affection. Part of that is due to the fact that sometimes I was intimidated by Bob, especially when I couldn't come up with a guitar solo idea fast enough to suit his needs. You have to understand where Bob was coming from. I had heard that when he worked with Alice Cooper's band he had brought in a session guitar player to do a lot of the solos, and I got the feeling that there was a chance he was going to follow the same plan with Kiss if I didn't produce quickly enough. The pressure was on, and with a hangover as a frequent distraction, I hit a brick wall occasionally. But part of it was also due to the fact that Bob wasn't very patient with me. I got the feeling that Paul and Gene might have told Bob about my drinking problem, and he may have put me in the same category as the guys in Alice's band. The difference is that I had the chops, those just needed to be finessed. Bob was an interesting guy with a great mind for music and production, but at times he had the demanding, volatile demeanor of a football coach or drill instructor. I guess you'd say he was a high-strung artistic type, which didn't always mesh well with my laid-back personality. Bob used to bring a whistle to the studio, and while cutting basic tracks he really intimidated Peter by putting a small box over a microphone and hitting it with a drumstick, as if Peter couldn't keep proper time. I really felt for Peter during those sessions. It was at times a very demoralizing experience for all of us, and no matter what any of us said, Bob's word was the law. Early on, in pre-production, we'd sit in a little room, almost like a classroom, and Bob would stand in front of us at a blackboard, lecturing about the recording process. It was like he was conducting a class. He was the teacher and we were his students. The funny thing is, Bob wasn't a whole lot older than any of us. He was only in his late 20s when we recorded Destroyer, so it wasn't like he was the grown-up and we were the children. But it sort of felt that way. Bob carried himself with an air of maturity and importance. He believed in himself, which is probably half the battle if you want to be a record producer. And we wanted to believe in him. But there's something I learned later on in my career about the duties of a good producer. His job is not only to help a band make a great record, but also to bring out the best in his musicians by creating an encouraging, comfortable atmosphere in the studio, so that everyone feels good about themselves. That was a quality Bob sadly lacked. Remember, we struggled with the fact that people were still calling us a carnival act. I struggled with it, anyway, and I'm sure the other guys did, too, even if they don't want to admit it. It bothered me to read reviews in which more attention was paid to the special effects than the music we played. Obviously I have no right to complain about any of that. We set out to create the greatest theatrical band in the history of rock, and that's what we did. I invented a character. I wore makeup. I figured out how to shoot rockets out of my guitar and have smoke billow out of the pickups. I bought into the whole thing and reaped the benefits. But there was always a bit of dissonance, a nagging sense that I had sold out to a degree I never quite envisioned. And that really gnawed at me. I wanted to be respected by my peers, and I wanted to be taken more seriously as a musician. A step in that process was to make a studio album that even our harshest critics could not dismiss. Destroyer was supposed to be that album, and it damn near succeeded. For me, though, I knew I hadn't come close to doing my best work. I had a wealth of musical ideas yet to be discovered, and with the right producer, maybe they'd be brought out. Bob Ezrin was brilliant, no question about it, but his style did not suit my personality. I've never been great at creating under pressure, so when Bob would tell me to do something in a particular way, and give me a small window of time in which to do it, I didn't always deliver. You have to realize I always strive for spontaneity. To this day, my best solos are not planned. I hit the record button and I just wail. If I'm in a good frame of mind, and there are good vibes in the room, I can do some amazing guitar work. On the other side of the coin, if there's tension, or I'm not coming up with stuff as quickly as people would like me to, I shut down. That happened to me on a couple of songs during the recording of Destroyer, which is one of the reasons I wasn't present for some of the sessions. I got the feeling I wasn't contributing enough, and Bob was always threatening to bring in a studio guy. Sometimes I have it, sometimes I don't. And when I was hungover or stressed, I didn't have it. It's long been suggested that studio guitar players were brought in to help out on Destroyer, filing in for me on the days when I simply wasn't there. Well, the truth is that it happened a few times. I can't deny it. Most of the guitar work on Destroyer is mine, but not all of it. I was hitting the clubs a lot at night in those days, living the life of a rock star. Sometimes that lifestyle wasn't particularly conducive to making a record. I was starting to get out of control, but I probably would have been a lot more cognizant, and I would have showed up more and been on time, if I had gotten more encouragement from Gene, Paul, and Bob. But it wasn't my record. In fact, of all the Kiss records to that point, Destroyer felt the least like my record. It belonged more to Paul and Gene, and to Bob. Interesting, really, since Destroyer's signature song belonged to Peter Criss. Beth was such an odd song for Kiss at the time, and the circumstances behind its writing and recording, and subsequent ascent up the singles charts, only add to its legend. All were completely improbable. Like me, Peter was always a bit hesitant about presenting material to the band, primarily because he figured he'd be shot down anyway. In the case of Beth, his reluctance was understandable. First of all, it was a ballad, and Kiss did not do ballads. Second, it was a bittersweet love song, filled with tenderness and regret. Kiss didn't do tenderness, either. Kiss did sex. Kiss did volume. On the surface, at least, everything about the song seemed wrong. But Peter had guts. He'd originally co-authored the tune with another bandmate a few years earlier, prior to Kiss. The song had originally been titled Beck, which was short for Rebecca, the wife of a different bandmate. The first time Peter played the song for the guys in Kiss, the reaction was mixed. Paul didn't like it. I was ambivalent, but Peter and I were such close friends that I usually felt compelled to support his suggestions. Gene actually thought it was interesting enough of a departure that it might help serve Destroyer's mission, which was to move the band in a slightly different direction. Bob Ezrin agreed, but only if he could put his stamp on the song, just as he would put his mark on the whole album. Bob was not the kind of producer who believed in letting musicians sit around the studio and create. He was an active participant in all phases of production. In the case of Peter's ballad, that meant rewriting and reworking. Whatever you might think of Bob, he deserves significant credit for Beth. It was his idea to change the title to something that sounded less androgynous. It was his idea to sweeten the sound of the song with orchestration, strings and piano. Bob was a classically trained musician, and he was blessed with a unique ear. Both of these things impressed the hell out of everyone in the band. Since we didn't even know how to read music, we were all self-taught and therefore in the same wobbly boat. To a degree, Bob intimidated all of us in the studio. We felt inferior to him. When you're around a guy like that, especially if he has a bit of a swagger, you tend to think he knows his shit. And while we would have second thoughts down the road, it's hard to criticize much of what Bob did on Destroyer. Beth was a good song that he transformed into something extraordinary. The story behind the record's success is part of Kiss lore, how it originally was tossed onto the backside of the first single, Detroit Rock City. As sometimes happens, though, a few radio stations began playing the flip side of the record, and people started calling in, saying how much they liked it, and how they couldn't believe Beth was a Kiss song. Eventually the single was reissued, with Beth on the A-side, and it became our biggest hit single. The song has grown on me over the years. It's obviously not indicative of the sound of Kiss, but that's one of the reasons I like it. Beth was a crossover song, and the whole point of a crossover song, artistic ambition aside, is to expand your audience, to bring people into record stores who might otherwise never consider picking up a Kiss album. It was a bridge in much the same way that I Was Made for Loving You would make Kiss accessible to fans of disco a few years later. The difference, of course, is that the years have been kind to Beth. The song holds up very well. I Was Made for Loving You. Not so much, in my humble opinion. Yeah, it became a hit single and I could appreciate the polish behind it, but I never liked the song and frankly hated playing it live. Hammering that chukka, chukka, chukka chord for 5 minutes straight was not only monotonous, but often gave me a cramp in my wrist. Beth was different. I didn't see it as a compromise. I saw it as a good song that deserved to be a hit. I was happy for Peter. And it was good for the live show, too. Gave it some variety and changed the pace. Instead of nothing but one machine gun song after another, it provided a nice break for both the audience and the band members. In the same way that my guitar solos would give everyone a breather, Beth served as an interlude. Peter would move to center stage and sit on a drum stool, while the crowd would softly sing along, and girls would quietly snuggle up next to their boyfriends. The rest of us would head backstage and fix our makeup, grab a cold one, snort a few lines of blow. Okay, I was the only one doing the blow, but you get the point, and generally recharge the batteries. Then we'd hit the stage again and finish up with a kick-ass grand finale. I have nothing bad to say about Beth. It was a solid ballad, and a perfect complement to the hard, driving rock that made up 95% of our live show. I had little to do with the writing or production of Destroyer, but if I take a step back and try to judge it objectively, I'd have to say it's one of Kiss's best studio efforts. Some of our hard-core fans didn't agree, although their resentment probably has less to do with the quality of the material than the simple fact that we had tried to do something different. That's another risk when you go from being a cult band to a worldwide phenomenon. The folks who supported you back in the day suddenly get proprietary. Fans who had been flocking to our shows since our demo days resented the legions of newcomers who hadn't heard of Kiss, or at least hadn't cared about Kiss, until Beth began receiving heavy airplay. And they resented us for expanding the brand in a way that seemed untrue to our roots. But there was so much more to Destroyer than Beth. Parts of it are legitimately great, while other parts, some of the sonic weirdness and studio effects, don't work quite as well as they were intended. As a guitar player, this is hard for me to admit, but the solo on Detroit Rock City is one of the single best moments in any Kiss song. And I had nothing to do with creating it. I always loved that song, and I would be the first to credit Bob Ezrin for writing the guitar solo. He came up with the melody, and I learned how to play it, and Paul figured out the harmony. It's a classic guitar solo, as good as anything you'll find on a Kiss record. I wish I'd thought of it, but I didn't. It was all Bob's. Destroyer also contained Shout It Out Loud, another anthem that became a Kiss concert staple. Overall, it's a really strong, diverse album that gave us more credibility in the music community and a little more respect from our peers, which was the whole point of hiring Bob as producer. If you listen to that record now, it's clear that we were trying to make a statement. We're not just a teeny bopper band, we're not just a gimmick. It was the right album at the right time, and it helped elevate our status in the industry, selling more than 3 million copies and cementing our reputation as one of the top bands in the world. Hard to find much fault with any of that. But I did. I had a love-hate relationship with Kiss. The bigger we got, the more money that rolled in, the more records we sold, the more I found myself questioning my commitment to the band. Paradoxical, sure, since I did like the money and I was pretty good at spending it. But with the success of Alive and Destroyer, Kiss became more than just a band. We were a corporate entity, the merchandising arm of which generated more revenue than I ever dreamed possible, $100 million a year at its peak in the late 70s. And a distressing amount of it came from the sales of products directed at the younger members of our audience. There were Kiss lunch boxes, Kiss action figures, Kiss makeup kits, Kiss dolls. You name it, we sold it. I remember feeling that we were getting too commercialized for our own good, and that some of the toys probably turned off the serious rockers who might have been our fans. At the same time that we were trying to branch out with an album like Destroyer, we were aggressively peddling merchandise to 10-year-old kids. That bothered me. I thought it was ironic that Kiss went from being a supposedly dangerous heavy metal band that promoted Satanism to a family-friendly band whose followers included legions of children. We'd be in the dressing room before shows, and instead of talking about the chicks we were going to bang afterward, we'd be talking about limiting profanity on stage because of the large number of kids in the audience. The pendulum started swinging in the opposite direction. I thought it was absurd that anyone honestly believed we were a satanic band, but I also thought it was ridiculous that little kids were coming to our shows. I'd find myself replaying concerts in my head, cringing because I realized the audience included a lot of younger fans. And I'd dropped an F-bomb or strutted in a sexually suggestive manner. It became a very difficult balancing act. It was so odd that we even had to think about it, but that's the way we were marketed. We became almost a parody of what we started out to be. I had friends in the business who said, "Man, you guys had this incredible idea, but you went too far with it. You've become so commercialized that you're almost a joke." Each of us reacted to these sorts of comments in his own way. Gene was the best at letting them roll off his back. If people accused Kiss of being a sellout, Gene would laugh and say, "That's right, we sell out every night." In public, at least, he attributed every ounce of criticism, every negative review, to jealousy. Maybe he really felt that way. I don't know. Gene has never been shy about hiding his lust for fame and adulation and money. Kiss brought him all of those things. Brought them to all of us. But they never meant that much to me. I think we all kind of felt locked into our characters, like we couldn't break loose. The spaceman was my deal with the devil. When you're generating hundreds of millions of dollars, your work tends to have an impact on other people. Walking away is complicated and messy. The thing is, for me it was never about the money. It was always about the music. I really believed in theatrical rock. From the moment I saw Pete Townshend smash that first guitar, I knew it was the right way to go. But Townshend never put on makeup. Even Alice Cooper stopped well short of what we were doing in Kiss. We pushed the envelope so much that in the beginning it seemed crazy. Then it was accepted. And finally it was expected. At that point we were fucked, creatively speaking. It's like a Broadway show, you have to give the crowd exactly what they paid for, note for note, or everyone goes home disappointed. I'm not being hyperbolic, either. By the time we hit our peak in the late 1970s, a Kiss concert really wasn't much different from a Broadway show, in the sense that every move was carefully choreographed, every word of banter scripted. Our concerts were so technologically complex with pyrotechnics, levitations, platforms that you couldn't deviate from the plan. I didn't like that restraint. The thing I liked best about performing live was the freedom and spontaneity. In previous bands, and even in the very early days of Kiss, we always messed with the set list, switched songs around, changed places on the stage. Once we had reached a certain level of technical sophistication and popularity, we couldn't do that anymore. It was the same thing every night: lighting, cues, sound cues, special effects cues. I started feeling uncreative and unfulfilled. I started feeling like I was a caricature. More than once, when Kiss was at the height of its popularity, I found myself sitting in my dressing room, staring into a mirror, and shaking my head at the sight of the spaceman. I don't think I can do this anymore. More often, though, these revelations, these moments of clarity occurred in the morning, when I'd be trying to shake off a hangover while getting ready for a personal appearance at a record store or television station. I wasn't having fun anymore. Kiss was no longer a dream job. It was merely a job.